Happy New Year. Welcome back to Lush Life, No Labels with Michelle. Our story of the week this week actually stems from a conversation I had with a friend. My friend asked me, what are my New Year's resolutions for 2025? And actually, at first, I said I didn't have any, not because I don't have any goals, but partly because if I do have a goal, something that I've started doing over the years is actually just starting to plan that goal right when I have the idea. This is the time of year where we're all talking about New Year's resolutions. And that actually brings me to the topic of the week this week. As I've grown up, my perspective on New Year's and New Year's resolutions has evolved. It's gone from making New Year's resolutions in December that I would execute in January to now initiating my goals at the time when I have that beginning motivation to meet that goal. In the past, like most of us, I'd make a bunch of New Year's resolutions like, oh, I want to work out more, or I want to read one book every month. I'd start off well in January, partially because I felt the pressure to follow through with the goals that I set. But I noticed that I would always start tapering off at some point, and then I would feel like I failed myself because it's like, I just made this resolution. Why have I already fallen off the wagon? And I really couldn't understand why, because I did want to meet these goals. So I needed to find another way to actually make sure that I was reaching these types of goals. And when I thought about it, I figured, oh, one thing is that maybe am not as passionate about starting this goal in January. I just said I would start it because that's what everyone else is doing. I also wanted to stop feeling bad about not achieving something that I didn't put much thought into. Now, when I think about New Year's resolutions and goals for the future, I think about what do I want to get out of the upcoming year or the upcoming month. Yes, we all have specific goals like getting a new job, moving, or reading, but ultimately, what's the main reason for that? And how is it going to improve my year this year? Before I talk about 2025 and some of the things I'm thinking about, it's always good to reflect on the previous year. For me, 2024 started off pretty stable. Actually, I would say it was one of the most stable years I've ever had. I liked my living situation, my job, and had a social life I found fulfilling. But then shit hit the fan. For example, there was major restructuring on my team at work, and that sort of changed the dynamic of things. I dealt with a lot of personal drama, unfortunately, which kind of demotivated me in a lot of ways. All of these things essentially grew a lack of confidence in myself, and everything around me felt pretty chaotic. I felt like many things were happening out of my control. Actually, that reboot of the Twisters movie that came out last year came at the right time because I felt like that was my life. One twister popping up after another. And that really threw me off a bit, and made me feel like, you know what, I need to take some time to figure out what is really going on with me, where do I want to be, and what are my next steps going to be. Now, all of this happened before the end of the year. So I wasn't thinking about, oh, what's going to be my goal for January. I really just wanted to get out of the rut that I was facing throughout my life. I have faced chaos, and I saw myself slipping back into some old habits and certain negative mindsets that I've really worked hard to diminish over the years. And I didn't like that that was happening. So I knew that there had to be a change. And I knew that, especially for the end of the year, but also just going into 2025, there were several areas of my life that I wanted to address. It's funny because this podcast is about self-improvement, but honestly, I wasn't really improving in the second half of last year. And in the past, I would have been ashamed to admit this, but hey, that's just a part of life. We can't improve constantly. And unfortunately, sometimes you take two steps forward and one step back. And that's okay as long as you recognize those old patterns that you want to change. I'd even add too that reflection is kind of tough though, because you really do need to face the reality that you're in. It could be about what's in your control versus not, and sort of coming to terms with what you can control. Or it could also be having to take accountability for the part that we each play in the things that happen to us or in what we've allowed others to do to us. These were some things that I had to really face for myself and be honest about, like, what did I let slide? Or, maybe I should have spoken up about this thing, but I let it go and now I'm the one suffering for it. It was important for me to really sit down and figure out, how did I get to this point and how am I going to get out of it? And I'm so happy I gave myself the time to reset and to really figure out what my next steps would be. Some things I've started working towards already and putting the foundations on, because some of those things wouldn't make sense to wait until January. And like I said, once I'm motivated about something, I'd rather start planning it out instead of feeling like I need to wait, because there's no better time than now. For example, I had some personal goals around getting better eating habits. I unfortunately developed a habit of eating late, like past 9 for dinner, but I actually started to remind myself each day that I can't eat past like maybe 8 p.m. and try to figure out ways to incorporate this. There are other things that I needed to wait to start, but I think it's important that I actually started to recognize those things, write those down, and start the initial thought process for how I'm going to reach those goals. One thing that I'm thinking about that happened obviously in 2024 was a lot of things around my career and the job that I do. One thing I realized is that I like having a job where I'm using my mind. And by that, I mean, I'd like to continuously learn in whatever position I am in. Now, I did start looking at some jobs, but I didn't jump too much into it because, again, around the timing, I know a lot of jobs become more available in January, February, and March. That's one of those goals that technically it's a new goal for 2025, but I couldn't have started it last year just because the timing of the market. Just giving you guys some of these examples to show you that if you feel the pressure of needing to have New Year's resolutions, you don't have to make it all about anchoring it in January. You can really approach each of them based on what it is that you want to do and when you want to start. And I would say for me, I used to make a lot of excuses about why I had to wait to start a new goal, when in reality, I at least could have started planning. And I think it's important for all of us to realize that it's okay and we can plan for the future. We don't always need to wait until everyone else is doing it. You could have started in December, you could start in February, you can really start whenever you want. But feeling that pressure to conform to society is something that I'd like the listener to really think about and to really not put too much pressure on yourself around those types of things. One theme that I'd like for myself in 2025, like I said, is to gain information through different aspects of my life, like my career interests, finance, learn more about the people that I have personal relationships with, and even something like keeping a better schedule when it comes to learning certain things about my life, or keeping up with certain trends in investing, right? Those are things that I can do on my own that don't necessarily have a specific time to it, but at least, I am moving forward with that goal and I don't feel like I need to do everything all at once. So remember, life is about those ups and downs. So if you had a 2024 that had you down, don't worry, you are not alone. On the other hand, like I said, there is no better time than now to improve those parts of our lives that we can control. Now that I have a better sense of what I'd like to get out of 2025, my next step is to break these down into smaller parts and tasks that will get me to completing that goal ultimately. So instead of asking you what your New Year's resolution is, I'll ask you what's one big theme you'd like to have in 2025, and what are some goals that you want to keep on the horizon for 2025. It's easy for us to talk about the goals that we have. The next step in actually planning that goal is a whole other thing. So I'd like to shift gears a little bit to talking about how do I actually set my goal. Frankly, I wasn't good at this a lot of the time before, and I would just make these goals, but I really would not flesh them out at all. I started using, I guess I'm going to call it the 5 W's and 1 H method. And I'll walk you through the method and then give you a simple example. The 5 W's are who, so who are you doing this for? Why, what is the reason that will motivate you to follow through with the goal? Where, as in, where do you want to be when you accomplish the goal? What, as in, what steps should be taken to get you to where you want to be? How, which is, how are you actually going to take the steps to reach that goal? And the last one is when, as in, what is your timeline to reach this goal? So you may have noticed that the in terms of the 5 W's and the 1 H, the last W is actually is when, which is the last step. And I put that one last because when I actually schedule or plan my goals, I don't want to jump into fleshing it out completely at the beginning. I just want to give myself a good foundation and a direction to move towards the goal. Obviously, I'm going to keep updating the goal over time, but it helps to at least anchor me somewhere so that, one, again, I am not over pressuring myself like, oh, I need to finish this thing in the next 2 weeks. That's not necessary. But at least if I know, oh, I want to do this thing every day or write this thing down every day, that gives me a direction as to where I want to start. Let me walk you through a simple example of one of the goals that I wanted to stop doing, which is eating late. For a little context, I developed what I consider a bad habit of eating late last year. This typically happened if I cooked dinner late or if I went out on the town and would get late night munchies. My biggest issue with this was that I'd go to sleep shortly after having the late meal, which one made it harder for me to sleep, but it also didn't do me any favors and led to me gaining some weight. In my head, I thought, oh, I shouldn't eat late, but then I would end up doing it, which I don't know why I would do that. So, knowing myself and knowing the different ways that I've set goals in the past, I figured, you know what? It's best to use this other method of the 5 W's and the 1 H that I talked about earlier. With that, let me walk through how I would do a simple goal setting for who. It's for me because I'm the one who wants to fix my habit. Why? In the last year or so, I've noticed I've been building this bad habit and it's led to negatively impacting my health and my sleep. So that's why I want to change it. Where? For now, I just said at home because that's where I mostly eat these late night meals. What? So, what am I going to do? One of the things I want to do is every morning figure out my evening dinner. I ask myself questions like, am I eating in or out? Am I working out before or after work? This may change depending on my daily schedule. But for example, if I'm eating out with friends or for a work thing, I need to make sure that it's scheduled early enough in that evening. If I'm cooking, then I need to make sure whatever I'm doing after work, I can do and be able to finish cooking my food early enough. Another thing that I've incorporated is brushing my teeth right after I eat dinner instead of waiting until right before bed. I found that for me personally, that actually helps a lot because once I brush my teeth and floss, I'm less tempted to have anything else late at night. So that's the what. And then the how. So how am I going to make sure that I do those things is by writing down. That's really one of the things, is just writing down my daily dinner plan to myself just on a little sticky note or on my phone every morning and sticking to that. And then finally, when am I going to do this? I've actually already started incorporating this. Like I mentioned before, this is one of those goals that I didn't feel I needed to wait until January to make it a New Year's resolution. It's something that I could have started any day, and I did already start incorporating these things. And so far, so good. I haven't had any late night slip ups, which is great. You might be thinking, well, what if I do slip up on the goal? That's completely okay. With any goal, it might take a few tries. I imagine I might eat late at some point, but it's not the end of the world. I do have a contingency plan though, where I only have fruits essentially at home outside of the ingredients that I use to cook my meals with. So if I am actually tempted to eat late past my certain time, then I'll have the fruit, which to me is still progress because even though I'm eating late, technically, it's better than eating something greasy in that moment. So that's going to be my contingency plan. Feel free to make contingency plans in your goals. Again, maybe I just do that one because if I do end up eating some fruit late, I don't feel as bad about eating late. It's so, at least it gives me somewhere to start. Sometimes you don't want to be too strict with yourself when it comes to habits, because if you're too strict with yourself, then it might be harder to actually stick to that habit. So it's always important to be realistic about what can you do in that time frame, or like what can you actually do realistically in terms of the goal that you set. And if you're wondering why the final step of this method that I have is timing, is because if you put timing at the beginning, again, you may constrain yourself with the rest of the steps. Remember, you can apply this method, the 5 W's and 1 H, to any goal that you have. The important thing here is that you set up a plan and you can always adjust your plan. Again, just give yourself somewhere to start with and see how long you can stick to the plan. Maybe you can even do a trial so that you don't put as much pressure on yourself. So again, Happy New Year, everyone. Thanks for continuing to tune in to Lush Life No Labels. Feel free to leave any comments, likes, and subscribe to this podcast. Episodes come out every Thursday or Friday, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.